Hello and welcome to this webinar delivered by the ISM Trust. I'm Maria Visitiu, Operations and Events Officer at the ISM, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jane MacArthur of Chartered Accountants Amati UK, who will provide us with some useful guidance on the self-employment income support scheme introduced by the government under COVID-19. Before we begin, we have a few points. The content of this presentation is for information purposes only, and it's not intended to be a substitute for legal or other professional advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should be able to see us and the PowerPoint presentation displayed on your screen. You should also be able to hear us, but we can't hear you. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the question box and we'll attempt to resolve the issue. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. If you think of any questions during this webinar, please let us know in the questions box and we will attempt to leave some time at the end to answer as many of them as possible. Now over to you, Jane, for a short introduction.
Right, thank you very much for that. So I've been doing tax returns and accounts for musicians for about 15 years now. I qualified nearly 20 years ago with a top 50 practice in Norfolk. I struck out on my own in 2005. So I have quite a lot of experience in dealing with all the different things that happen with musicians, mixtures of employments, a little bit of foreign tax, and the things that go on there. Now, just to reiterate something that Maria just said, one of the big problems of relying on guidance at the moment is everything is just coming out on a daily basis. Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs have been literally updating the guidance every day, and like the same page has like an extra link in it or 2 extra paragraphs, and we're sort of jumping on it trying to spot it as quickly as you. But I've seen complaints around of my accountant said this and it's wrong, and it's like, well, 3 weeks ago that was the best we knew, but 1 week ago. So again, if you're listening to this in the future on the recorded feedback or anything, things could yet change, as this is all as we know it today. So I'm not going to spend too long preaching at you from slides, but I thought it would be helpful to go through the main scheme rules as we know them with any of those amendments. So we'll first of all look at the eligibility for the scheme, look at what you can be doing to prepare for your application for it. And so we'll start with the next slide and look at your current employment status as the first checker. So this flowchart is available on the ISM website. The link's in the bottom left corner, though I think it'll be added to the chat later on. So in case you can't read it all, because it's a little bit of small print on here. So the first question is, who is eligible? Now, as long as you're registered as self-employed or registered as a partner in a partnership, and you've been registered since before the 5th of April 2019, you should be eligible for the scheme, as long as you are still trading in that self-employed or partnership status today, or would be if it wasn't for COVID, and you intend to carry on in the future. Now, unfortunately, anyone that's registered as self-employed or a partner since the 6th of April 2019 is unfortunately not currently covered by the scheme. These newly self-employed kind of slip through the holes because you've not had to file a tax return yet. The year's only just ended at 5th of April 2020, and they have no records of your earnings on their system. And they feel that this will be liable to huge fraud and or potential fraud. Now, we've been lobbying, many different industries have been lobbying on the behalf of how unfair this is. Possibly they might bring something in down the line, but I can't offer any remote guarantees for that. At the moment, they're telling people to fall back on universal credit. But as long as you're registered as either a partner or self-employed before the 5th of April 2019, you should be eligible. The other big problem where we have eligibility is if you've been recommended to set up as a director of a limited company. Now, historically, there have always been tax reasons for doing this. There have been the protection of limited liability if you're sort of in an events business or a slightly different side of music. And unfortunately, this is also not covered by the self-employed income support scheme. There is some recourse to furlough yourself and get something through the Corona Job Retention Scheme, the employed setup. But at the moment, the directors of limited companies are another big group trying to present lobbies to the Treasury and hoping to get some movement on the rules. However, back to the people that are eligible. So the main thing You needed to have been trading before 5th of April. You needed to have filed your tax return for the year ended 5th of April 2019. You needed to have got that filed by the 23rd of April last month. When they first announced this scheme, they gave you 3 weeks grace for that. And as long as you filed by 23rd of April, you should be eligible. Moving on, I'll be talking later about the Revenue's eligibility checker. And I will just point out, if you were one of those people to file the return late, i.e. it was after 31st of January, but before the 23rd of April, those people currently seem to be showing as ineligible on the revenue system, but they're constantly updating. They probably haven't had time to process those returns yet. And as long as you comply with the other eligibility requirements, we'd expect you to show up later on in this process. So if you file that personal tax return, and if your total self-employed profit for last year was less than £50,000, and if your self-employed earnings were more than half of your total income, you should be contacted as eligible by the Revenue. Now, eligible isn't the last stepping stone, because you do still have to confirm those other things to the Revenue, that you have lost profits due to the virus and that you are continuing in self-employment. So just because the Revenue's eligibility checker says you're eligible, you might have ceased trading or something, and you're actually not. It's just the Revenue don't know that yet. So those are the main conditions to go through. Now, if for 2019, for example, your profits just crept over £50,000, if you go back to the last 3 tax years, the ones ending 2017, 2018 and 2019, if you average your profits for those 3 years under 50,000, you will still qualify. And again, if your self-employed profit was just under 0.5% of, just under 50% of your income for the year ended 2019, again, you can go back to all 3 of those years, average it out, and if your average self-employed profits were over 50% of your total income, you can still qualify. So there's these 2 different conditions. Either you had to obey them in 2018, 2019, or obey them in the 3-year period for you to be eligible. So if all of that works out, then we hope that the Inland Revenue have just confirmed that the scheme should be open on the 13th of May, and they hope to start paying out claims on the 25th of May. They say money should be in bank accounts within 6 working days from either the 25th of May or after that from the 26 working days. So hopefully this scheme will be administered as smoothly as the furlough seems to have been, and the employed furlough scheme has gone quite smoothly in that after the applications, the money came through quite promptly. As you make the application online, you should be told whether you're eligible straight away on the spot. So that's also really helpful. If we go on to the next slide, then I've just got a few criteria about the HMRC eligibility checker. This was suddenly put up live on Monday morning. There's a link there which will take you to it. Now, the main thing is this can obviously give you great peace of mind, but the Revenue agree with you. You are eligible. It will tell you a time that you will be able to apply. They're trying to phase this out. I don't think it's a first time, first served or anything. It's just each person gets told you can apply from midday on the 14th, or you can apply from 3 o'clock on the 15th. And they're spreading people out. Most people I've seen so far are getting dates between about the 13th and 18th of May. That's just the starting point. As far as we know, there isn't any cut-off at the moment for how long you've got to claim. If you're too busy or you've got other things to deal with for some time, you should still be able to make this claim in early June. Watch this. You'll have to watch the guidance for if they do bring in any deadline, but I expect they'll keep it open for quite a while. So the eligibility checker, again, if it does say that you're not eligible, I would not panic at this stage. A lot of people have jumped at the point it tells you it thinks you're not eligible. There's a button you can press to say, please, will you review my case because I think I am eligible. Now, when you press that button, you'll be put into their queue for review, but they're not going to start looking at those till the 16th of May. I believe the reason for that is they're still processing some of these late filed returns. They're still processing some of these things they know will become eligible. And so the situation is constantly updating. We've also seen many cases, several people were told on Monday they were ineligible, and on Wednesday they went back to the checker, tried again, and they're eligible. So it's evidence they're updating it. So if you phone the Revenue, they will just say, we're not looking at these till the 16th, we're looking at them through the appeal process. So to try and save save people hours on the phone to the revenue. As you can imagine, they've got staff working all over the place and so on. They're under a lot of pressure at the moment too. So try and hold tight if it does give you the result you weren't looking for. So to go to the website and check your eligibility, you would need your unique tax reference number. This is a 10-digit number you get when you register as self-employed. It'll be on the front of your tax return, all in my revenue correspondence. And your national insurance should also be there alongside it, your national insurance number. These two are the only things you need, and it will tell you if you're eligible or not. If it tells you that it thinks you're eligible, it will ask you to confirm some further details. I think it wants an email, possibly a phone number, and they will tell you you can claim from this date to this time. They also, the big thing is they want you to set up a government gateway user ID and password. And again, at the end of this process, it says, do you have a government gateway account? And it helps you create one if you don't. This is because when they open the scheme and you go to the site on the 13th of May, they're going to be asking for your bank details. They're probably going to ask you to confirm that you've lost income due to the virus. And they need you to put this into their secure system so they can pay you safely and securely. Now, we have been told there will be a system coming for those that don't have computers at all or don't want to do online things. We have no details of that right now. I assume they will have a paper-based letter system coming out to notify people in due course. We don't know quite exactly when that will be, but I assume it will be hot on the heels of all of this. So that covers.
I was gonna ask, in terms of the process, beforehand we were aware that HMRC was due to contact people who are registered as self-employed, but I understand you're kind of encouraging everyone to go and check and do the website checker thing before they're contacted by HMRC. Is that correct?
Well, certainly I'm encouraging my own clients to do this because I know there's just a lot of anxiety out there. People can't plan, people can't budget, they don't know when this money might or might not arrive. So to go to a website right now and be able to get confidence that the revenue has deemed you correct. I mean, of course, it's not great if you go there and you suddenly find it says you're ineligible, and I don't want to kind of increase anyone's anxiety levels at this stage, particularly as the revenue are obviously still adding people on a day-by-day basis and they're still looking at it themselves. But it does help the kind of sleepless nights syndromes that sort of people now have a date and a time that they should sort of put the details in. The system will say yes, and the money should be through on the 25th of May. In regards to the revenue notifying people, I mean, we all expected that sort of this would be letters in the post to people, again, to prevent fraud and everything, and also so people know that it's not a scam. Because I've seen a lot of reports, as people have circulated this checker in the last few days on social media and so on, lots of people have gone, are you sure this isn't a scam? And I saw someone report, the thing is, the revenue have legitimately been sending text messages and emails to people they have contact details for to point out this system is live. Because I think ideally if people create government gateway address accounts in advance, it's going to be slightly less load on the system when it opens on the 13th of May. However, so if you get a text from the revenue that looks like text from the revenue, some people are going, oh, is this really the revenue? Because they don't normally text, and they don't. And there was a very good scam one that kind of did look exactly like the revenue, and it says you are eligible for sort of £781 or something. Now, at this stage, the revenue are not mentioning any numbers whatsoever. If you get any correspondence from them, it should just be going to this link, and you should only be putting in your UTR and NI number. You should be able to find the link for yourself and check that it's got a gov.uk ending and it's not some spurious link. But this is throwing problems into the mix because, of course, the legitimate revenue messages are going out, and quite rightfully people are being vigilant and going, oh, is this really the way? I thought I was going to be contacted, and is this the contact, or why haven't they written to me? And so this checker is legitimate, but do still be very careful not to fall for any scams or text messages. We don't know at this stage. I'm guessing that when you apply on the 13th of May, it may well come up with you are eligible for this amount, which will be in your bank account on that day. It may even be that they just say we've received your application and you don't find out the amount till it lands in your bank account. But certainly if you get any emails or anything with actual amounts in, they're probably scams.
And do we know how long we have to apply once we're contacted by HMRC?
At the moment, we haven't heard any time limit. I mean, all of this is slightly ahead of the rollout times and so on we expected. So I'm still guessing the letters will come in the post, because obviously there are people without access to the internet and so on. And maybe those letters will have the official line of, you have till the end of June to apply in these 2 ways, and this is how you could apply on paper or something. So, I mean, I assume basically you're going to get the money quicker if you apply online, because it will just take longer for postal applications to be received and dealt with and processed and so forth.
Sure. And do we know how quickly the money will come through, or is that not?
So they've said the very first payments will come through from 25th of May. So obviously if you apply on the 13th, that's 12 calendar days at least. But further down the guidance, it said it should usually be there within 6 working days. So, so if you're applying a bit later on, then it should always be there within 6 working days.
Okay, that's great. So far, we know that the money is equivalent to 3 months' earning. Do we know what happens after that?
Yes, I didn't mention that properly actually, but it's 80% of your average monthly self-employed earnings. We don't know anything. I was looking back through the guidance this morning, because there's several websites out there that are saying this is for March, April and May. I can't find any reference anywhere in the official guidance saying it covers specifically these calendar months. We didn't actually go into lockdown till the 20th of March, and I think most people were continuing to earn relatively normally, at least up to the middle of March. And so kind of if you look at this from that point of view, it would be from 20th of March, 20th of April, 20th of May. You're already sort of covered mostly up to June. Because I know people will look at the furlough scheme and say, but they could claim from the 1st of March to the 30th of June. But in reality, the applications I've dealt with on the furlough scheme, hardly anyone can really legitimately claim before the 20th of March unless their business did actually stop early, which obviously applies in some industries and so on. But with music and teaching and things were going on usually pretty much up to that date. So it is still equitable with the furlough scheme, even though they have the extra month. But we don't know what's happening. Hopefully there should be guidance soon. Certainly the furlough scheme have to announce any extensions probably by the middle of May, because if people were considering mass redundancies, they have to give a 6-week notification period. So basically at the 6th of May, if they say they're not extending before 30th of June, will be a time that there might be lots of redundancy decisions at various companies. If they say they'll extend a bit further, then they buy themselves another month to look at that decision again. But there's been headlines in the press that he's considering a 60% scheme. There's also something about lowering the threshold on the claims, so more so instead of a £2,500 cap, that might be lower, because it's only 80% of your average profit, and it's capped at £2,500 per month. You won't get more than that if you're a high earner.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. We've gathered some scenarios from common questions that we received from ISM members. So firstly, if a musician who has a mixture of self-employment and PAYE work across a year, the PAYE work is not taxed at the source since it isn't enough to meet the tax threshold. Does both the PAYE income and the self-employed income count towards this scheme?
So PAYE income, even if it's only sort of a small teaching job, half a day a week or something like that, if it's treated as employed income, then it's completely separate to your self-employed income. It goes on a separate place on the tax return and it's treated differently. If it's a small amount and under your personal allowance for the year, they won't have deducted any tax at source, but this doesn't make it self-employed earnings. And unfortunately, it doesn't count towards the self-employed scheme. It's kind of even worse than that, because the PAYE earnings count against you when looking at is your self-employed profit more than 50% of your earnings, because they count as other earnings that aren't self-employed earnings. So, and this is another really big problem area. I have several clients trapped in the sort of they're earning 30 to 50% of their income from self-employment. It's very significant to them, but unfortunately they slip between the cracks of this scheme and they're not eligible.
Sure, of course. Secondly, we've also heard from members whose income has significantly fluctuated in the last 3 years as a result of either starting a family or illness or just simply having a slow year. Can these years be carved out for not being reflective on your average earnings?
As far as we know, they are just going to literally take your 3 years' profits and average them to get a monthly figure. If you haven't been self-employed that long, if you're only self-employed for 2 of those tax years, they will average the figure for the 2 years they've got into a monthly figure. One point they have slightly moved on. Originally, if you registered as self-employed halfway through 2017-2018, and you're only self-employed for 6 months of that year, they originally said they were just going to divide everything by 12 because they couldn't tell the difference. However, in the latest detailed guidance, it does say that they'll sort of take into account that it was 6 months self-employed earnings for that year and like 12 months for the next year, and they divide by 18 overall. So that's a very tiny improvement for those people that have only become self-employed or a partner in a partnership in the last few years. However, there's again a really big problem with maternity leave and other sickness leaves and so on out there, where someone's earnings were decimated in one of those 3 years and it's not a true reflection. There's also people that were predominantly employed some years ago who are now 100% self-employed, but unfortunately those employed earnings are counting against them as well, and we've got no solution for this either.
Sure, and equally, if you made a loss 1 year, do we know how HMRC are going to treat that?
So if 1 year was a loss, it's just going to be one of the 3 figures they take into the average. So it would be your profit from 1 year, they'd subtract the loss for the next year, they'd add the profit for the next, and they'd divide by the 36 months in arriving at your total. So again, that just sort of, it's not great news if you had a loss, but that's what they consider to be a fair average.
Sure. And lastly, is there anything you can say about musicians whose work is predominantly seasonal, so weddings or more busy at Christmas?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no scope for that in this scheme. It's just a flat average of the last 3 years self-employment. And so if you're losing all your summer work when all the festivals are on, other things, because I know many people can have more PAYE between September and March and then more self-employment in the summer, but unfortunately they're just taking a flat average of what you earned for the 3 years.
Sure. Now, should musicians be completing their 2019-2020 tax return now, even though you have up until the 31st of January 2021 to submit your return?
Well, all accountants will always recommend to everybody that you should file your return as early as possible. It gets it out of your mind, gets it out of your way. You'll have surety of knowledge of what your next tax payments are owed at July or January. You can save towards those. You don't get a nasty shock on the 25th of January that you suddenly owe lots more than you expected because something changed in your circumstances. Now, this question is often asked in reference to, if I'm newly self-employed and I currently don't qualify, if I get my return in really quickly, will they give me something based on that? Now, I mean, I have no knowledge of the future, unfortunately, and I don't have my rose-tinted spectacles on to see what that future could be. But I get the feeling if they suddenly announce now, anyone that's put their 2020 tax return in the first 25 days, they can have a payout. But now we're going to draw a line because now people know about this, it could be subject to fraud. They're going to annoy as many people as, because it's only going to be a small fraction of people that have actually got them in already. And they're just going to create another massive injustice that a few people got it and a lot of people didn't. Another thing to consider, there's many accountancy firms that have had to furlough large numbers of staff. If they weren't set up with laptops and encryption, the data protection aspect of what we do is obviously very important. And so a lot of accountancy firms have, with lots of staff on furlough, they've often got 1 or 2 partners trying to firefight everything, get this information for the schemes out to clients, try and get on with some work in the background. So there may not be capacity to do it right now. I mean, certainly April to June are usually my really quiet months where sort of only 2 people that want a mortgage kind of get their tax done early. I try and write the emails to encourage my clients to send it in, but April to June is when I kind of get on with company accounts and some other things to tide myself over. Right now I've got a bigger pile of tax returns for this time of year than ever. I mean, we're just 30 days after the tax year end and I'm sending out to clients, I'm really sorry, but due to like all the emergency stuff, as long as you don't like need a mortgage imminently, which most people don't with the situation, I'll probably be a few weeks in getting back to you. So do bear with your accountants during these times. We're trying to keep 1 step ahead of the game, but normally in our profession, any new tax law is proposed, it's eventually signed into law, the professional development schemes put out courses on it, and by the time it actually comes into effect, we're all kind of, we know about it and we can disseminate it to you, whereas this time, in between doing all that firefighting and trying to get the tax returns out the door, we're trying to read all the social media for the latest headlines or the latest little bits that have been added to the guidance. So.
Okay. Do you know if musicians will be required to pay this money back?
Well, at every step of the way, this has been called a grant. So as long as you are eligible, as long as you haven't broken any of the rules, there shouldn't be any reason that you would ever have to pay this back. Now, of course, if people say, oh, look, the eligibility checker says I'm okay, even though I became a limited company last year and I actually put all my income through the limited company, let's just have a go, let's try and claim anyway. There could be a pickup with that sort of thing. Also, if you take the statement saying I've lost money due to coronavirus, but if you end up filing a 2020-21 tax return in a whole year's time that actually ends up showing bigger profits than the previous year, I imagine you might at least get a letter kind of saying, how did this come about? Or like you said, you had, and it is still entirely possible that someone sort of had a devastated business for 3 or 4 months, but if things were to pick up in the best case scenario position, you might just work twice as hard the rest of the year. And I mean, as long as you've got, this is where I'd recommend that people keep evidence of cancelled work. If you've got letters or the emails that kind of had you booked for concerts and have turned you down, just keep those in a safe place somewhere, because even if your earnings ended up less affected, the only thing written in law is you must have lost some income. That could be £5 of income, or they haven't really specified. So yeah, as long as you've got evidence that you lost work, that should be all right.
Sure. And as the grant is taxable, national insurance will be due, obviously. Can you talk us through how this works?
So I had a conversation with another accountant yesterday, actually, in checking this fact, because a lot of grants often come through as unearned income, so that they would be taxable, but it's unusual that national insurance should be due on it. However, in the wording for this grant, they've specifically said that you will need to report it as self-employed income for any universal credit claims. And you'll have to declare it as self-employed income, and also that you're effectively working 16 hours a week for any tax credits claims, because they are literally just sort of effectively paying you because nobody else is in the normal line of your business. Now, as far as we can tell, this does mean you will be liable to Class 4 national insurance if your overall profits for the year are above the threshold, which is around 8,600-ish. So that will just be assessed on your tax return next year. This will count as part of your 2020-21 income, the tax year ending next 6th of April, and that will go on your next tax return in the normal way.
Sure. And will this grant count as income when assessing student loan repayments?
Yes, as it's taxable income, again, if it pushes you over the threshold that you'll need to make those payments, it does count towards that, unfortunately. So I think for type 1 loans, that threshold's somewhere around 19,000. For type 2 student loans, it's around 25,000. So if in this tax year overall, your earnings plus that self-employed grant push you over the threshold, you will pay student loan on it too.
Right. Payment on accounts are due to be made in July 2020. We are aware that these can be deferred. Can you remind us what these payments are and talk us through what to do if you're expecting to have to make a payment in July?
So payments on account are one of those difficult things that people are never quite sure if they're paying the tax for the following year or the past year or exactly where it comes from. But the idea at this point in time, the year to the 5th of April 2020 has finished. You have already made one payment on account if you're on that system at 31st of January. So you've already paid a predicted 50% of your tax bill. In the normal way, you'd make another payment on account at 31st of July, which would be the other 50% of your predicted tax bill. And this assumes that your earnings are very similar from year to year. So the tax year has ended, you have earned all of the money, so making the tax payment on the 31st of July shouldn't usually be a problem. However, this is the payment that the revenue have deferred. This no longer has to be made, it's automatic, that you don't have to pay it till 31st of January. And the thing is, by next 31st of January, you will have had to file your tax return for the year ended 2020. So instead of it being that 50% estimate, that assuming your income's the same, you will know the exact amount of that payment because your tax return will have been filed. So effectively, the second payment on account has gone away, but your January payment will be higher because of it. So that kind of makes up for each other. The other thing to remember when doing a tax return is next January, you'll also need to make payments on account for the following year. Now, that's the tax year we're currently just starting, 2020-21, when probably a lot of people expect a significant fall in profits. So if the tax return comes out with some vast bill next January, you can always say, I need to lower this payment on account to a more sensible estimate of my tax bill because I hardly earn anything and therefore I won't be paying nearly so much tax next year. And you can always change your payments on account online anytime. You can do that separately to filing the tax return. The main thing is it needs to be realistic. You can't just say, I'm going to make zero payment on account because I don't want to make any payment. If it turns out you should have made payments and they were due, the revenue can charge interest on the timing difference between when you said they were zero and you're not going to pay them and when you eventually file your next tax return showing that you should have paid £500 or something. So.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're kind of finished with the questions that we had gathered from common inquiries. If there's anything that you want to add before we go on to the live questions that we've received, and we'll attempt to answer as many as possible. If we do not get a chance to answer the question, we do have a record of the question, so we'll follow up with an email. Or similarly, if the question requires Jane to go into a lot of detail and it's particular to your case, then she'll follow up with an email directly to you. So don't panic if the question is not answered live on the webinar. So now, if you just give us a chance to read through some of these questions, and we'll go ahead and answer some of them.
Right, yes. Shall I just take the first question and start looking through these? So first question from Celia about how much you can claim. There's a lot of people being very kind of worried about, do I have to have lost the exact amount or whatever? The rules of the scheme say if you have lost money due to coronavirus, you are entitled to this grant to help you out. So there is no problem. You don't need to show you've lost the amount of the grant they're giving you. You don't need to show a precise amount that you've lost. As long as you've got evidence that you've lost performance work or lost pupils and so forth, it should not be a problem. I mean, if you claim the grant in good faith now and you sort of end up realizing in 5 months that actually kind of you lost 1 pupil, but then you gain 4 next month, then no doubt in due course there might be some sort of scheme to return it. Also, if you feel other people are in a worse situation or whatever, there's always groups you can donate to for those that fall between the cracks and other people less fortunate. But as long as you've lost earnings, then you're entitled to claim this grant. And as we don't really know when performance is going to get back, certainly in large scale performance terms, this could go on for quite a long time. And right now we don't know that there'll be any extension to the self-employed scheme. So while for a few people that have managed to continue a lot of teaching, the self-employed grant on top seems quite generous. If you've lost performance work on the side that doesn't pick up again for another year, then it's probably not going to end up being that generous. So yeah, there's no problem with legitimately claiming the grant now. Keep a note of your losses, keep a note of what's changed for you. That's the main thing. Right, shall I carry on reading down? So as I said earlier, if you were late filing your tax return, as long as you filed by 23rd of April, they've said you should be eligible as long as you meet the other eligibility requirements for the scheme. However, one client of mine that filed late and 2 clients I saw of another accountant on a forum and a few other people speaking up on social media have all said they've failed the eligibility checker in its current state. This is why kind of, although it's there to give peace of mind to a lot of people, I know it is creating panic with if its computer says no. But the revenue are constantly updating this. For another case, it wasn't a late filed return. Someone was ineligible on Monday. They were eligible on the checker on Wednesday. So I think the revenue have said you can press a button for a review of your circumstances, but they're not going to look into these till the 16th of May. I think that's partly because a lot of people may be able to go back to the checker within the next 10 days and hopefully it will turn up for them. I don't know if the DRO or the bills should affect things. I don't think what you may or may not not owe the revenue should affect anything at this stage. If you're up to date with filing your tax returns, or if you filed by 23rd of April, you should be eligible if you meet all the other criteria. So try not to worry too much. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do right now if it says you're not eligible. Several people have spent a long time on phone queues to the revenue just to be told the reviews won't be looked at till the 16th of May. So unfortunately, right now, I think you just need to sit tight and hopefully we'll get answers to that in due course.
Thank you. Someone else is asking, saying they've heard that the government may not be contacting people who are people who are eligible directly, and that they will have to contact HMRC themselves. Do you know if that's correct?
Since the very beginning, the revenue have said they will contact people, and I can't imagine they can do otherwise. I think they'll have to have a massive post out, but their postal services are always slow. Like someone on the phone will kind of tell you we're posting this today, and it turns up with you like 3 weeks later, because there's often problems in their mail room at the best of times. And obviously right now, if there's social distancing and bringing in different practices and got people working from home, it may be slowing things down. Originally, we didn't expect to hear about this scheme. They said people would be notified from the middle of May and the payments were going to be June. So it looks like they've given themselves internal deadlines, which they've hit a bit earlier than that. The electronic stuff is starting a bit earlier than that, but I would still expect everyone to be notified. People will not hear about it otherwise, or some people that are eligible may not.
Sure. We've got two very similar questions regarding the type of evidence that you need to provide. So someone is asking, they've had gigs cancelled, and they've also lost members from their choir that they're running now virtually. What kind of evidence will be needed? And also the next question is very similar. Is it going to be kind of a template of what constitutes evidence, or is it just a tick box situation that you'd have to tick to confirm, yes, I have lost income?
Again, we haven't seen exactly what's going to be rolled out on the 13th of May yet, so I am guessing here. Within the profession, we mostly guess it's going to be a tick box exercise. I think this is why they've made you liable for claiming it, and agents can't claim it on your behalf, because the thing is that would just add an extra step of complexity, because we'd have to get your sign off and approvals on everything. So they want to deal direct with you and hear that you've lost income. I think they're going to make it as simple as possible for the purposes of getting this money out to the millions of people that need it. However, for your own exercises, this is why you should keep evidence of sort of the letters and emails that cancelled work and things like that, because they're allowed to investigate your tax return for up to 12 months after the deadline for filing it. And so they've got 2 years that they can come back to you and say, hang on a minute, this doesn't look like it adds up, and your income doubled last year and you claimed the grant or something. But in reality, I think most people are going to end up hit by this in some parts. So I don't think they're going to come around quibbling of, did you lose sort of £800 or £2,000? There is no threshold. As long as you've lost money and you've lost work, you're eligible to claim at this point.
Right, and I think that kind of answers the next question, which was if there would be a threshold to determine that your income has suffered enough in order to qualify. But I believe you've just answered that.
I'll just make one little point on that. I mean, if you've managed to sort of rebound and like literally what you lost in April, you've managed to replace from another source or something. I mean, if your income levels are really consistent, then it might be slightly difficult to make a claim. Because obviously all self-employed work fluctuates a little bit anyway. But if you've had long-standing pupils for 2 or 3 years and you've got sort of 10 parents that can't afford them, or people that don't have the capacity to set up Zooms and all the rest of it for virtual lessons, then I think it's perfectly reasonable if you've lost long-standing work, even if you're managing to find little bits to replace it. But if you literally show the same monthly average income for March, April, May, June as you have for every month of your self-employment, that's where you maybe need to think about it a little more. You could talk to, I haven't actually heard a revenue response on that question yet. And also, I mean, if it would be your fault or not. I mean, if you go back to them in November and said, actually, I've managed to do really well, I've managed to pick up enough income to replace everything, I don't need it. I don't actually know how you would give money back to the revenue at this point, but I'm sure they'll sort out a way, because that is their job.
Sure. There's another question from someone saying, if you are on PAYE furlough or for part of your income, can you still claim self-employment help?
Yes, so if you're on furlough, that's a good question. They will pay you 80% of your employed part of your earnings, but of course that doesn't go any way or portion to replacing the self-employed part of your earnings. And if you're self-employed, of course, the big problem here potentially is the self-employed part have to be more than 50% of your total income on the tax returns. But as long as you qualify for that, then you can have the self-employed income support at the same time as the employed furloughing thing, because normally you would get your employed wages and your self-employed incomes. So it's only 80% of each in the sort of same way. So that should be fine.
Sure. Someone is asking if they claim the grant, can they still do any work after this or during at all?
Oh yes, so unlike the furlough scheme say you must not do any work for your employer while you are on furlough. It's completely different for the self-employed. You are allowed to continue working and continue pulling in what income you can. I mean, most of my clients that do bits of teaching, they've had quite a high level of success of moving to Zoom lessons, but obviously there's going to be some cancellations. And that could also get worse, because if we do see a lot of redundancies as the furlough scheme ends, then luxuries or parents being able to afford lessons and so on, that might become more problematic as well. So yeah, you are allowed to work while claiming the grant. There's not a problem with that.
Okay. Someone is saying that they've had no contact from HMRC whatsoever so far, but they've done the check on the website and it says that they are eligible. Should they worry about this just yet or not? So
as far as I know, there have been no mass notifications. I haven't directly seen. I've heard hearsay reports that some people have had an email, or if you've already got a government gateway account, they may have emailed you or sent you a text message telling you about the eligibility checker. But whatever the mass notifying everybody, that has not gone out yet. The eligibility checker is sort of floating around as a, hey, they've opened this bit, but they haven't kind of told everybody yet. So that's also sort of inducing a lot of worry. But as long as the checker says you're eligible, then you should be able to go and claim. I think it's basically this electronic system is coming in front of whatever paper-based system will be, and the mass mailing that we assume will be coming, that hasn't gone out yet. So.
Right, okay. Someone is saying that they've checked the eligibility and they think they meet all the requirements. However, the checker says that they're not eligible. Should they keep on checking, as you mentioned previously, that it might just get updated, or do you think they should go ahead and make a report online?
So when you get to that screen which tells you you're not eligible, I would press a button and say, please, like, sort of review this because I think I am. I press that as soon as possible because they've probably got those review requests sort of lined up, and if they need to go through them on the 16th of May, they will. It's still well worth going back and checking every few days because, as I've said, they seem to be updating the system. There's definitely a problem with anyone who filed their 2019 tax return late. There's other mysterious problems. Like I said, some clients got fixed between Monday and Wednesday this week, so it's entirely possible. I think that's why they're not going to review any of these till the 16th, because they know they've still got a portion of taxpayers they're sorting out and making sure they're putting on the system.
Right, okay. Let's see if we have had any other questions.
There's one here: losing 70% of work but classed as extremely vulnerable and will be affected till the end of the year. As I said before, there are no limits on this. As long as you have lost some income, you are eligible to claim. So there's no problem with making the claim for the whole grant. As far as we know, there won't actually be any ability to claim part of it. I think it's just when you say you make your claim, you're eligible, that this is how much you're owed. No doubt the next round of questions will be checking those amounts and sort of checking the revenue haven't made mistakes. I think they will be pulling this straight off the boxes on the tax return, but I'll be looking forward to seeing the first few results from my clients and making sure it's all correct.
Okay, sure. Someone said that apparently HMRC have updated their announcement to say that this the grant application has to be made by the taxpayer. We're not sure if you can, the person who's asked the question, if you can confirm if it's a new update that you're aware of, just because we haven't heard about anything similar just yet. But
yes,
if you know.
I think a lot of the initial headlines for this scheme may be slightly misreported, and they're like, this is a grant that will be available. It will be 3 months of your earnings. It will be paid into your bank account in June. Now, the thing is, they always said, we will contact you if we think you are eligible to apply. There is always going to be an application state in this, because they always need your personal assurance that you have lost some income due to the virus, you are still working in self-employment, and the other details like that. So there was always going to be an application as part of this, and they were going to notify you that they thought you were eligible to apply. So yeah, the application is always going to need to be made, and this is also because obviously they don't have bank account details for a lot of people. Unless you've had a refund from them in the past, they won't necessarily have the bank details to make those payments.
Sure. Someone is saying that they've been offered a payment for a lost contract and is wondering if this is going to affect their eligibility, or if it's going to have any effect on their eligibility.
So again, this comes down to if you've lost overall income. If that was your only contract and you've been paid the full amount, then you probably haven't lost any income. However, if that was just one contract or lots of bits of work and you've lost several other bits of work, or if that payment wasn't for the full amount, if it's sort of a 50%, I've heard a lot of organisations have been trying to be as fair with musicians as they can and make 50% payments where they can. So it doesn't mean you're not. So it depends. I've also heard of situations where people have been like, oh, well, because I can claim the self-employed grant, I don't need to take the 50% from sort of, because obviously all the other music and arts organisations out there are also suffering. They want to do the best they can by individuals, but they've got to kind of keep themselves afloat. I had a really unfortunate story where someone had some work lined up and it was cancelled, and they said, oh, we are going to pay you. And then they said, oh, we've just heard about the government self-employed income support scheme. So because you're going to get paid by them, we're not going to pay you twice. However, the person concerned, her self-employed income was slightly less than 50% of her total income. So she ended up with nothing. But you can see that would end up to duplicate payments to some people or less to others. And it's problematic all round.
Sure. We've had another question from someone who unfortunately is kind of falling between the cracks. So their self-employed income is under 50%, so it's only 40 to 45% of their earnings, so they're not eligible. And then the rest is 0 hours PAYE, and they're also not eligible for universal credit. And if there are any other options, I will just say that there is a helpful advice page on funding opportunities for musicians, and you can find that on our ISM website. Under advice, there's a coronavirus dedicated page of advice, so you're more than welcome to check that for various other options for funding, just because at the moment I don't think, unfortunately, nothing, if universal credit or this self-employment scheme doesn't apply, then there are a few other options that you can check.
Yeah, it's a really big problem for people that are just under 50% of their income, but it's still a significant fraction, and we were really sorry to see that as a clause in there. So yeah, I hope that you can get some traction from one of the other funding sources, and yeah, good luck.
Do you know if there's any chance that they might lower this 50%, or if they're gonna extend for people who are earning more than 50%, more than £50,000 a year, or if that's not?
So these were two of the key points that I was discussing with the ISM, and the ISM have been lobbying for, among many other bodies. I saw pretty much exactly the same hit list of things on the MU's list, and many other arts and theatre organisations. I mean, I think, to be honest, if they were going to make any changes, it would have been between the 30th of March when they announced the scheme and sort of the 1st of May when they put the Treasury Directive out and the rules for the scheme. Unfortunately, as we've seen no movement in those thresholds, it doesn't really look likely that they will happen now. I was sort of optimistic at the time that, oh, this is just someone hasn't thought it through. Surely they have to push this boundary up. But unfortunately, the schemes are costing them so much money. Of course, we do have to figure out a way to get the country back to work. And while nobody wants to do that at the expense of lives, there's still sort of many lives that are going to suffer either way out of this. So it's difficult.
Yeah. I think we've received another question. Someone saying that they are over 70, but they still teach at home in order to supplement their state pension. Do you know if they would still be eligible for the grant?
So if you normally have self-employed income and you've been filing tax returns on that basis, and assuming that self-employed income is more than your total, more than half of your total income, so it would have to be more than your pension income and any other pensions you have, then you should still be eligible in the same way as everybody else. There's no discrimination on age grounds, or that, you know, because many people in the music profession carry on working right into their senior years, and so as long as those self-employed earnings are more than half of your taxable income, you should still qualify.
Perfect, thank you. Just let's see, I feel like we've just received another
There's
one.
just been a reaction to that, so pension payments accounted in the PAYE basket. So when looking at your total income, it means your total taxable income on your tax return. So your total taxable income would be any employment income, any pension income, any dividends or savings, any rental income. And so your self-employed income needs to be bigger than the sum of all those other bits. And these figures should be on the tax computation page of your tax return if you need to check it. If you took your pension April 19, will the average apply over the last 3 years? So if you took your pension in April 2019 and fully retired and ceased your self-employment, you wouldn't be eligible on the grounds that you must still be continuing in self-employment and aiming to continue your business. Now, if you started your pension but you carried on working alongside that, as many people do, it should be fine as long as either the 2019 tax return or the 3 years of tax returns meet the qualifying criteria of being over half of your income as self-employment. So there shouldn't be a problem with the pension following on in April 2019. Eligibility refused at 49.26%. That's probably the hardest case I've seen yet. I've got one client on about 48%, but unfortunately, I think, I can't see the end of the question right. Can he ask for the last 3 years to be looked
at in case there are higher self-employed income?
All right, so they will either look at your 2018-19 tax return, or they'll look for the 3 years ending 2017, 2018, 2019. And if you meet the eligibility criteria on either of those, you would qualify. So if you add up the self-employed income for all 3 years, divided by the total income for all 3 years, if that's greater than 50%, you would qualify. So is that on the eligibility checker that's being refused? If it's been refused on the eligibility checker, it may well be because they've done that calculation and they find it. Unfortunately, there's no scope to ask for particular years to be looked at. There's no scope to ask for particular years to be discounted. We do find this pretty unreasonable because people have had maternity leave. There's a couple of people who've had 2 maternity leaves in the 3-year period, and so they're getting sort of doubly disadvantaged for that. And there's another follow-up. Still earning self-employed with pension, can you apply? So as long as either the average for the 3 years or the 2018-19 tax years over 50%, either one of those things can be true and you should be eligible. So if in any one of the years you're under 50%, if the 3-year average is over 50%, you should be eligible. So hopefully that, and they were refused on the checker. That probably means the figures they have on the tax return for the 3 years still, because they will automatically look at both scenarios. They will automatically look at both 2018-19 and the 3 years. And if they can come up with making you eligible on one of those points, the eligibility checker should hopefully say it. I mean, if you've got your tax returns in front of you and you've done that calculation and you think it's wrong, then you may be one of the people that's currently falling between the gaps on the checker, and you could ask for a review to check it. But I'd probably look at your own numbers or ask your accountant to check the numbers for you. Double check.
Thank you. We still have a couple more minutes. If there are any questions, if you can't think of any questions now, or you realize you've got some questions after the webinar has finished, you can send them to membership@ism.org and we will forward it on to Jane. We'll attempt to answer your queries as much as we can. No problem, our pleasure. Let's see. Any more questions?
So all I've managed to see justifying the 50% of your income, more than half of your income must be from self-employment. They made a statement like, for everybody else, the average income was only 4,000, so it was negligible. And I think they've decided that the administrative burden of doing another sort of that many claims was sort of outweighed the point. Now, I mean, certainly I'd say if your self-employed income was less than 20% of your turnover, then I have clients in that position, or sort of the semi-retired or the small amount of earnings on the side of a PAYE job. But there seem to be a lot of people between kind of 20 and 50% who have been left out of this. It seemed a very arbitrary threshold, and I think it's really bad that they haven't moved that. Could you repeat the email address? Was that the one for queries?
Yes.
Did you have it?
Yes, it's membership@ism.org. It's the generic membership ISM address, and you can find it on our website, under contact us or anywhere, and we will just go to our membership inbox. Let's see, do we have something else?
Just seeing one more question on contract payment. It was done on an ex gratia basis, so it doesn't need to be declared as income. I would think if it's a payment that's replacing work income, my gut reaction would be I would assume it was normal self-employed taxable income because it was to replace those earnings. I don't know what the contract or the details say, so again, if you wanted to put some more details to the email address, I could look at that offline.
Yeah, sure. If you are ISM members and you do have any legal queries about your contract that you need our legal team to look over, you can send them a copy of that contract, and that email address is legal@ism.org. Again, if you are an ISM member, they'll be happy to help you. Someone else is saying they've taken on additional teaching via Zoom to compensate for lost work, and will that work against them? And I think you've covered that, Jane. If you can prove that you have lost work, you can continue to do the additional teaching that you mentioned.
When I work out 50% of my income, do I discount the tax-free income? No, and when you're looking at the total income, you should take the total self-employed profits that you've paid tax on for the year, and you should compare this to the total income on your tax return, which would be adding in any employed, rental, savings, income, and other things. And you would take those two figures, the total income and self-employed, before deducting any tax allowances or going through the rest of the tax computation. Yes, I think we're there.
I think we might be getting towards the end now. Let's see, just to double check.
One last question in there. Yes, the 16,000 savings threshold for universal credit, as far as I know, that's still in place if you've got savings because you're hoping to buy your first house or whatever else and so on. That does tend to make you ineligible. I think I saw on the thing there is something about if you're saving that towards your next tax bill, so it's not your money, or there's some circumstances in which they may not count all of it. I'm not exactly clear on their exact criteria for that, because obviously with the self-employed sometimes there's a very big bill coming every 6 months, so it's perfectly reasonable that you might have some £1,000 in savings, but yeah. Okay,
perfect. As I said, if you do have any questions following on from this, that email address again is membership@ism.org. I just wanted to thank you very much, Jane, for this very helpful webinar. Thank you very much for being with us today. I hope you enjoy the long weekend. Thank you all for being present at this webinar, attending this webinar, and we hope to see you at another one soon.